Welcome to The Film Board, the movie conversation podcast reviewing the latest releases that you've seen and want to talk about. My name is Andy Nelson, host of the Next Reel Film podcast. On this episode, we're slipping into the driver's seat as we shift into ninth gear for the Fast and Furious franchise. That's right, it's Justin Lin's F9.
The world has a way of changing. And we change too.
I know some people, they would die for me.
There are moments that separate us.
They're my family.
But we always come back together.
We heard y'all needed a little love out here.
Y'all ever thought about the wild missions we've been on? We've taken out planes, trains, tanks. I'm not going to even think about the submarine. And now we got cars flying in the air? Who is he?
Jacob is Dom's brother.
Been a long time, Dom. Little brother.
You always say never turn your back on family, but you turned your back on me. Now your little family is in my world.
Are you ready?
Whatever's on you,
Is you ready?
it's on us.
Are you ready?
He's got his own private army. We need help.
Bring what you got.
No way.
Is you ready? Whole squad ready.
So how do y'all want to play this?
Fast.
Today, I am joined by our very own Ocean Murph. Hello, Ocean.
Hello, Andy. I am excited to join you and I'm excited to talk about this movie. I'm excited really for multiple reasons, not the least of which is this movie represents the first time I went back to the theaters since the pandemic. And it was a wonderful, exciting experience seeing movies again, you know, big and large with, you know, the big screens and the large sounds and the explosions and, you know, everything that goes along with the movie theater experience.
How big did you go? Did you go IMAX? Like what size theater were you in?
Just a normal size theater. I did not go IMAX. Looking back on it now you're making me wish I had gone IMAX. I didn't realize that I missed, not going IMAX until you just now mentioned it. But
That's
yeah,
right.
It was just,
You can always go back. You can always go back.
yeah, when I see it the second time. Yeah. So then I just went to, my local neighborhood theater, went along, got seats. I went with my oldest son and it was a nice experience. They're still doing some distancing inside the theaters. So, that we have as well. But, you walk in the common areas wearing the mask. And then when you go into the theater, you can, you're taking your mask off and just watching and enjoying the movie. And it was nice to kind of slip back into the movie theater going experience, right? And it even, took a little bit while with my son and I to remember, we can't talk to each other during this, right? So probably about 30 minutes in or so, we're like, hey, you know what? Maybe we should be quiet, right? Because we're not in our living room where we can just chit chat about everything while this is going on. So.
Exactly. Yeah. It's back to the rules, back to kind of trying to be polite to your neighbors next to you when you're watching the movie. So, well, that's awesome. Yeah, I saw it on the theater. And actually, this is not the first movie that we've talked about on the Film Board that is only in theaters. We have talked about a few others. So we're still in that window though, where, sometimes it's in theaters and streaming somewhere. Sometimes it's only in theaters. And so it's kind of nice to, go back to this one, which, it had a whole year that this one was sitting on the shelves waiting for a chance to come back to theaters because, and I think rightfully so, they held off on releasing this in the theaters because this is one of those big bombastic movies that it makes sense, these action thrillers to kind of have in the theater where you're seeing all of this stuff happening on the big screen in front of you.
Absolutely. And I think that, while when it was going on, I was saying, I was like with everyone else saying, hey, just release all the movies that are at home. It's fine. We all have big televisions. When I saw this in the theaters, I did realize that, they made the right choice. This movie needs to be big.
Yeah. Well, let's start talking about it. Let's get our initial thoughts on F9. Before we do, or maybe as we talk about this, I'm really curious what you think. This one is just called F9. That's kind of how they branded it, right?
Yes.
And I'm very curious about that because, it was The Fast and the Furious, Too Fast, Too Furious.
Yes.
And then we have The Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift, which is its own thing. And then Fast and Furious, Fast 5, Fast and Furious 6, Furious 7, F8 or Fate of the Furious.
Yeah.
And now we're just to F9.
F9.
And
which is Saga, right? The Fast Saga. That's what it is. F9, the Fast Saga.
Although it doesn't say that in the credits at the end of the movie, it just says F9.
Yes.
And I just like, okay, so if F8, Fate of the Furious, if that, we're assuming that was Fast, are we assuming this is Furious 9? Like, or does it even matter? It's just so weird that they're coming up with these abbreviations for these movies. Like, that's all you need to call it now. F9. It's like, it doesn't even matter that there's any content in it. It's just, this is all about this incredibly small bit of branding for this movie. F9. And that kind of says it all.
Yes, it is. It is great branding. I think it works for it all the way. I just assume it means fast. Ever since Fast 5, I've really kind of always referred to them that way.
Well, then there's Furious 7.
Yeah, there is, but it was always just fast. It's just, I've always just said fast, whatever. And so, fast, and part of that though is because of how much I loved Fast 5. To me, the branding makes sense because it's better marketing, you know, and the idea of the Fast and Furious, I think really comes back more to the first movie, which was about that article about, you know, about street racing, you know, in California I want to say it was in the 90s, street racing in California in the 90s. And that's what the article was primarily about. And, you know, and then that was all the Fast and the Furious. And it was, you know, it had a connotation there, right? That they were street racers that had a, you know, like little minor life of crime. Now we are so far removed from that. Okay.
Right. Although we get street racing, I was surprised.
Yeah, they're still in cars. But other than that, we're way away from what that was. And so I think that it does make some sense to then just say, hey, what's a cooler thing to do? Because really what we're building here is a nice flashy brand, right?
Yeah.
And a nice flashy brand in really a universe, right? Once you have 9 movies that have all taken place in roughly the same universe, you're building a universe. And so there is a Fast universe, and that's where these movies take place.
Yeah, they certainly do. You know, for me, it's interesting how this movie has kind of really shifted so much in tone over the course of it, you know, and I think there was a lot of talk about those first 4, especially when 2, 3, and 4 all felt so kind of different and not quite the same. And then all of a sudden Fast 5 came out. It's like, oh, this is what we can do with this franchise. That's cool. That's kind of fun. But I think something that they really have been pushing largely from the start is this idea of family, and this film certainly digs a lot into that family aspect as we really kind of look at the Toretto lineage, kind of going, you know, all the way back to Dom's childhood with his siblings, and so I would like to posit that this is actually Family 9. I think that's what I'm going to pretend that the F stands for this particular film. So, well,
F is a versatile letter, so you can make it stand for a lot of different things. So I think family is just as good as Fast. It all works.
Yeah, that's right. So, all right. So, what did you think of this one? Leading, kind of, you've seen all of them, and did you watch Hobbs and Shaw, which is kind of the spinoff?
I did watch Hobbs and Shaw, yes.
Okay, so you've seen everything in this universe
yes,
leading up to this film.
I've seen it all. I've seen all of them. Goodness, I think Hobbs and Shaw is the only movie I've only seen once. So I've seen all of them multiple times. So initial impressions, loved it. Right. This movie was great. It was, there was so many things about it that I think that they improved on and kept going with what they're doing and what they're building. I think that first and foremost, it did really kind of 2 or 3 things that I really liked. One is sometimes these Fast and Furious movies, they are great bubblegum popcorn with nauseating acting. And I was impressed with the actors that they got to play young Dom and young Jacob and how they were better actors than most of the other regular actors in the movie, right? They were great, right? And so their scenes with each other and their interactions with each other didn't seem as jilted or forced as sometimes as it does. So I think they did a great thing there. But the overarching part of the movie, which is really where I've started to love this, I've always loved this movie franchise because I've always enjoyed the ridiculousness of the whole thing, right? And that it's really purely true escapism of like, yes, this would not happen in the real world. And the section of the scene when Roman is talking about how, you know, are we invincible, right? That whole thing, I think to me was really opening up and revealing to the audience, hey, audience, we're in on this too. We recognize that what you're watching now are superhero movies.
Yeah.
right? And that's how all of this stuff happens and works, and you can just go with it, and it is massively entertaining, massively entertaining, and each time they ramp up the stunts in each movie, and to me, what they've done in this one, I think are great, which we can talk about each one of them differently, but they're amazing in what they're doing.
Yeah, there is a lot of that. Well, I'm thrilled to kind of hear your reaction with it. It certainly has been getting a lot of kind of up and down as far as kind of reactions from what I've been looking at. And I think some of it is like some people are very excited that Justin Lin is back in the director's chair. He did 3 through 6. And then he took a break for a few, and now he's back, and here he is doing this one. I'm thrilled that Justin Lin is back. I mean, I love F. Gary Gray. I think that what he did with the Friday films is a lot of fun, but I wasn't so sure with him as kind of the action director. And 8 seemed a little like that. Well, and 7, James Wan. I love James Wan too. But I don't think that either of those films were as solid for me as like 5 and 6, which I think are the kind of the pinnacle of this franchise so far. And this film, I'm thrilled that Justin Lin is back, but I also, and I don't know if it's because he's kind of taking the reins on some story elements that other people had done before him, like all the stuff with Mr. Nobody and Charlize Theron's character and all these sorts of elements that we have here. But I found that it was a little plodding. Like I didn't get into it nearly as much as I wanted to. I actually agree with you quite a bit. I enjoyed all of the bits of the Toretto childhood that we had, kind of those flashbacks and the story going on then. But like the action sequences, like I thought they were exciting. I liked what they were doing with them. But I also felt like, okay, well, eventually, when is this one going to end? And I don't know if it's because they are trying always to one up themselves. And sometimes I'm just like, well, okay, they're not. I feel like they're making it bigger and bigger, but not necessarily better. And so that's kind of where I ended up sitting. But we'll talk through each of them because I am curious, because I think some of them really stand out as better than others.
I am surprised by that. Yes. Yeah. We should talk about that. I think that they're ramping them up and making the stunts better, bigger and better and crazier is kind of why I'm,
sure.
Yeah. And then that's really kind of what's left. Right. And that's kind of what I'm going for. That's kind of what I think they're going for. What I enjoy about it is that's what they're doing.
Well, and I certainly enjoy it. And it's certainly something that I could watch again because it's easy stuff to watch. And it's like the James Bond franchise. Like there's a lot of those movies, like I probably won't return too much, but I still find them entertaining enough to watch, like watching through the action sequences and everything. It still is fun to look at. And I think that I'll be there with this one because I think that there's stuff that is definitely interesting and works. But I also just felt like sometimes it's like, all right, well, come on, let's just move us along. Let's talk about that. So,
okay.
First off, Justin Lin, were you glad to see him back? Did you care that he came back at all? What's your position on Justin Lin back in the director's chair?
I missed him, but didn't know that I did.
Oh, okay.
To me, Fast 5 has always been the gold standard. Tokyo Drift was a cute little movie that I actually saw too many times because it was my oldest son's first favorite movie. So I saw that movie more times than I should have. It was good enough to see a couple times, but not as many times as I ended up having to watch it. Because when a 5-year-old really latches onto a movie, you're going to watch it a lot.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
So anyway, so I found that, once Fast 5 came along, that was definitely the watershed moment to me of what they could do with this franchise and what the direction is that they were going. And 5 and 6 were definitely the best two. I enjoyed 7. 8 was mixed for me. I did like it a lot, but I did notice that it was not as good as the others. And so when Justin Lin came back, it felt more like when I see F9, it feels more like a return to what Fast 5 and, F6 felt like, right? And so it was one of those things of where, I think he comes back, he makes a far better movie than at least the 2 sequels before him. And so I think he did a great job. I missed him, but didn't know that I missed him.
Certainly he's had his hits or misses in this franchise too, because 3 and 4, he was even still trying to figure out the direction for, what are they going to do? Like everyone is trying to figure out what are we going to do with this? And like we said, Fast 5 is really where things seemed to kind of shift gears, as it were, and kind of take us in a whole new direction, which was lots and lots of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's part of what, as far as things I think that he really brings to the table that other directors don't, is part of that is the experience of the 4 movies, right? Because he was able to start with, because Tokyo Drift was kind of like, we're going to take the same idea of the first Fast and Furious, but move it to Tokyo. Yeah. And then Fast and Furious was like, okay, we now realize we need Vin Diesel back in this franchise, and we're going to do a story that's really the same idea, just a little bit amped up, right? And then he was like, well, no, we can keep going with it. And then there's Fast 5. And so I think that the fact that he was around for those 4 movies creates an attachment and an understanding of these characters that I think is beyond what happened with, like, the directors of 7 and 8, who were really just kind of carrying the baton of what he was working on to build. And then now he's kind of back and saying, okay, well, I'm going to finish this off in the way that I think it should be done. And so I look forward to what happens in F10 and F11.
Is there going to be an 11 now?
Yes, 11.
I knew there was a 10th.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Well, the 10th movie is so long that they said we're going to split it into 2, and so it's going to be 2 movies.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, F11. So
because I knew that they were doing a Hobbs and Shaw sequel and a possible spin-off of that, which I don't know, other than it being a female-led spin-off, I don't know if they really have figured anything out beyond that. But
right.
And my recollection is that the 10th film they're talking about, that's kind of the end of it, right? I think that Vin Diesel came out and said that that's kind of the end of this whole thing.
Yes, but they decided to make, a 4-hour 10th movie, so they're going to make it F11. So they're just going to split them in 2. It'd be great.
Yeah,
so it'll be one. So the last 2 will be, kind of like Kill Bill, where it's one long movie that you split in 2 pieces. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yep.
Interesting. Well, I mean, I really do like Justin Lin, and I think that he did manage to kind of figure things out with this. And even, I mean, looking at what he did in Tokyo Drift and Fast and Furious, I still think that he was carrying those films well. The action sequences, the way that the story kind of was structured, and I think you're certainly seeing that in some of the action sequences here. I just find them to be very fun, amped up, a lot of energy, and I feel that he's doing a good job with it. So it worked for me.
Yeah.
You brought up the flashbacks because there's a lot of family in this movie. I know this franchise is all about family, but we get even more family because now we're getting all these flashbacks to Dom's childhood, where we find out he had a brother Jacob that's never been brought up before. No. Weirdly, Mia's never in the flashbacks, which is very strange to me. I'm like, why are we having flashbacks to their childhood? She's never there. I don't know.
She's in one.
Was she in a flashback?
Yes. She is in the one. There's one with she and Letty. And it's the scene when they do when Dom and Jacob have the drag race that are like, the loser goes away. When like that, the girls,
right.
Yeah, right. The girls that are there right there, that one of them's Letty,
that's
one of them's
supposed to be, okay.
Yeah,
I wasn't
that's
sure.
The only one. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But she's not there. But part of it though is, part of what you have to forgive with these Fast and Furious movies is if you start thinking about the timeline too much, things stop making sense, right? Because they've never really gone over how far apart in age are Dom and Mia, right? Like even in the first one, I mean, Dom is her older brother for sure, but it's not like she's not in high school, right? See, everyone's an adult in the first one.
Yeah.
Right. So, and unless Dom is 30, right? If she's 22, 23, you're figuring Dom's only 2-3 years older, right? So they never really go through that. And so then it becomes a thing of where since they've never really discussed how far apart they are in age, of course you can squeeze a brother in there, right? And, in between the 2 of them. And then also even in the conversations about when they talk a little bit about like when the father died and everything that they Letty says to me, well, you were 16, right? The implication there is now that Dom and Mia are 8 to 10 years apart in age.
Yeah.
Right. Which would then become kind of strange as far as timeline goes, because then it's like, well, wait a minute, that means in the first movie Dom is 30, right? So really what I find best when it comes to this with the Fast and Furious movies is stuff like that. Let's just let it go. Like I think that they rightfully understand that the real finer points of a story is not always why you're here. They have themes that they're going for and they're doing these things, some of these things well, but it's an action, fun, blockbuster movie. But yeah, the timeline of their ages doesn't make sense.
And to that end, I mean, it's an action, fun blockbuster movie, but it's also a soap opera because this is all the sort of stuff that happens in soap operas. And it just makes me laugh at this franchise so much because it's like, siblings suddenly appear that you never knew about. People die and then come back from the dead and they're totally fine. It's like over and over again, these different things happen and it cracks me up. But I think that they get away with it. And I think people are so drawn to it because of the connections that people end up making over these, the whole span of this saga of attaching to these characters because you've had all this time to get to know them and really enjoy being with them.
Exactly. And that's really what it is. It's a fun time with, mostly with characters that you've been watching now for 4 or 5 movies. You understand their quirks and their tics and you have with characters, you have things you like about the characters, things you don't like about the characters. They're going to still do those things you like and amp that up and they're going to amp up some of the things you don't like. And it's just great. It's a real nice, entertaining thing. And yes, it is absolutely a soap opera that, not only with adding in a brother that no one ever heard of, which then means, well, we can throw in other siblings in other movies if you want.
Of course,
right?
Yeah.
Because, you never mentioned that one for the first 8 movies, so you can bring up another one. There is no discussion about, well, what about their mother, right? Which that's ripe for 10. Like, does their mom show up somehow? Because they've never discussed her, right? What they're doing with that. And then also, the bringing back of Han really is, to me, one of the ultimate moves of we're just going to give the fans what they want. The fans love this character. So sure, we killed him twice, but we can get around that. And they do, right? And they just say, this is what happened. And then boom, now he's back.
Cause did he die, which one? 5?
He died in 3 and then he died again in 7 or the post credits of 6. Well, it depends upon there was a post-credit sequence of 6 where Deckard Shaw kills him, right? Yeah. And then they do it again as the first scene in 7. Because Deckard Shaw kills him and then calls Dom up and then has a bomb at Dom's house and everything. And that sets 7 up and goes there. So it's the same death scene, but it happened in 2 different movies. And then in 3, it was a random car that hit him. In 7, he's now hit by Deckard. And now in 9, it was Mr. Nobody setting up Deckard as the pawn and the fall guy to hit him in the car to make everybody think he's dead when he's not. And by the way, he has a ward. Right? That he has a girl that he's been taking care of for at least 10 years.
For a long time. Yeah.
Right? Yeah, at least 10 years, which is like, and nobody brought this up, which is, that's another thing with time with this. It's like, well, wait a minute. How much time has passed? Right? It's for all that to have happened. And so it's like, you know what? Just go with it.
Well, and you did see the mid-credit sequence, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. When he's
so
with
another little nod to that whole thing going on between Shaw and Han.
Exactly.
Which is,
Right. Yeah. And then, and so, Shaw's going to, be surprised, which I think which I don't know for a fact. I think though the mid-credit sequence is for Hobbs and Shaw too. Like that's what they're leading into.
Oh, you think so? Well, it would make sense.
So. I don't, because I remember they are making Hobbs and Shaw 2. It would make sense for that to lead into there. And then for Hobbs and Shaw 2 to have some post-credit sequence that brings you back to the F10.
But that would be, and I know we're just in speculation territory here now, but I mean, in the first Hobbs and Shaw, there are no characters from the franchise in the film other than obviously Hobbs and Shaw, right? None of these other characters pop up. So if Han were to pop up, that would be kind of all of a sudden a step outside of what they were doing with Hobbs and Shaw.
Yes, because Hobbs and Shaw was staying completely, kind of a separate story outside of the world of it, which I think they can still do because Han is an odd how he counts, right? Because he's in this, but he's not pivotal. It's not like if you had Dom show up, right? Now you've brought everything together. But Han can kind of move back, or he can move around.
I was assuming that it was just going to be a setup for the 10th movie.
Oh, okay.
I guess we'll just see.
Yeah.
But let's go back to the flashbacks. I know we were kind of talking about a lot of different things, but I wanted to talk a little about these a little bit more because it was an interesting structure that we have because this franchise is so much about family. And here we have this scene play out in the kind of memories of Dom. We're kind of getting a sense of him and his brother and their dad teaching them like everything they know about racing and all this sort of stuff. And then it's this big race. There's this other driver that is very antagonistic with their dad. And it seems to Dom in his memories that this other driver perhaps sabotaged their dad's car to win the race, and then dad's car actually ended up exploding and killed their dad. Then we kind of, through the course of the way things play out, we start getting a sense that when he's in prison, it was actually, I can't remember, some car thing, some cracked thing.
Right. That would create misfires and make your car go slower. And they even said it's a way for race car drivers to throw a race. And it's like, oh, well, ding, that's what we're doing.
And so then he thinks his brother was actually in on the whole thing. And then later we find out that dad actually had the whole idea, and dad and the brother came up with this whole thing, and we've got to keep it from Dom. And so we have this interesting flashback structure that and actually I thought there was an interesting moment that really reminded me of Fast and Furious, the fourth movie, when Letty dies and then Dom is trying to figure out what happened, and you have that moment where it's almost like he's got supernatural powers, where he's like watching the accident take place and he's like noticing details that is like, how is he noticing all this? Is he does he have some weird cognitive abilities? Like, it was so strange. But then he's doing the same thing in his flashbacks, where he's now watching his brother, and it's like, oh, his brother was the one. Like, it's so funny watching all of that.
I think it was a visualization of repressed memories.
I'm sure it was. I'm sure
that's what I thought they were going for. Because in both of those sequences, unlike with the Letty one, but in this one,
the Letty one was a stretch.
The Letty one was a stretch, but this one, it's a fuller memory of things of where, yes, Dom was at these places, right? Like he was outside his dad's room when he made the phone call. He heard the one sentence, which at the time, that sentence taken out of context could mean so many different things.
Yeah.
Right. And so now he's provided a new context where now it means probably what it really meant, which was he was going to, make sure to deliver, throw the race so they get the money. Not, I'm going to deliver by winning because that's what I'm supposed to do. Right. Which is what Dom, that when he first heard it, probably thought. So didn't think anything of it. Also, his brother going underneath the car hood and everything, and then saying, okay, you're good and everything. When he sees it the first time, thinks nothing of it. Second time, it's like, oh,
right, Dad's saying now or whatever. Yeah.
Now I have a different context of this thing that I did see happen. And so there's that. I think, though, to me, part of the interesting thing with the flashback sequences was the way they framed them, I didn't follow them exactly the way they end up at the end. So the best example is in the very first one. I didn't realize it was Dom's father. I thought we're saying, okay, this is his older brother, right?
Oh.
And that's who was in the car was the brother. Because once they're making his brother John Cena, it's not like they look like twins. So I was like, well, they basically said, decided to go with this whole, we're going to give guys that look somewhat alike somewhere and then just throw them on there. So I thought that's who it was like, okay, that's his older brother. And that's also the age difference was also explaining, oh, he's so much older. That's why we've never seen him before. Right. And then in the second one, it's like, that's my dad. And then you see the younger John Cena actor, you see young Jacob next to him. Then it's like, oh, okay, that's his brother. And so, the structure of the flashbacks to me, as I said at the top, it provided with me that I thought these guys performed these soap opera moments better than the regular Fast and Furious actors do. And then two, it did provide a structure where each time they flashed back, it was a new piece of information for this story.
Yeah.
Right. Now, not all of the pieces of information were vastly different than what you thought they were going to be going in. Right. But at the same time, I guess I gave the benefit of the doubt. You didn't know that, oh, his dad actually threw the race and that, the brother isn't as bad as he's being portrayed of being, like he didn't kill his dad, or anything like that. Right. So there is, it provides a good method for the redemption story to occur for Jacob. So that way the sequences and things that happen at the end of the movie then pay off because you have also gone on this ride of, okay, Jacob's a horrible person. He killed his dad. Now he's the bad guy. He must be stopped to, oh, well, really, he was, living in Dom's shadow. His dad asked him to do this to help him out to throw a race to then help pay for debts. And, he's like, well, what am I supposed to, he's a son. What am I supposed to do?
And to never tell Dom.
And to never tell him, right? Like, what's he supposed to do? Right.
Yeah, right.
The whole idea of like, where Dom's like, well, you should have come and told me. I'm like, well, you're not his dad. Right. So it's like, what are you supposed to do there? So I think that they did a good job of creating an arc for the Jacob character through the flashbacks that they could not have created reasonably in present time.
First of all, it struck me as strange because we've never done this in the franchise before, having like incredibly lengthy flashbacks like this, right? It was like a whole new thing. I was like, oh, okay, this is new. This is interesting. I ended up going along with it. And I think a lot of the reasons that you've already said, I really liked these actors. I thought that they really carried those scenes well. I loved the way that it just all played out. It was actually a really interesting story. For me, I'd say maybe a little more interesting than some of the other stuff going on in the present day. But I think that's just because there was like a real heart. There was something really kind of challenging that they were all working through. And so I thought that was actually a pretty interesting way to kind of integrate all that. So yeah, I thought it was actually a pretty interesting setup for our story, kind of having this whole concept happening.
I agree. And I give the writers of this, and this one's written by, was it Daniel Casey with Justin Lin and Alfredo Batello, who that's a new set of writers. Most of the other ones are all written by like 5 through 8 were all Chris Morgan and Gary Scott Thompson. So I'll give them credit. The new writers, some of their credits that I really want to give them is doing the flashback sequences this way allowed to have 2 stories going simultaneously to create the effect that I think that you're describing, right? The flashback story is actually a story with feeling and meaning and stakes and consequences. And it's a really full story, right? While at the same time still allowing you to pay service for the present day stuff. Because the present day stuff, it's a straight ahead story. Bad guy wants to get a thing that's going to then destroy the world. We have to stop bad guy from doing that, right? The end. That's the real basic story. And that's a basic story of, that's Fast 6, 7, 8, right? That's where you give them the standard.
Even
now,
Hobbs and Shaw. It's always some like really
Yeah.
strange piece of new technology that they're after.
Exactly.
That this is going to destroy the world. And
Right. We got to stop that. Yeah. So and that's great. And so the thing is, once you throw in, and it's his brother, right? You have to figure out a way of how do we make the stakes work, right? And the flashback sequences make it work, right? Because if you took that out, we'll jump to the end here. Well, if you took that out, when the brother kind of turns against his benefactor a bit, right? At the end, because he gets betrayed, he switches over, the benefactor switches over to be with, Cypher, instead of him. And then all of a sudden now he's kind of fighting with Dom's team, right? Without that flashback sequences and the roller coaster, or at least the ride that you've gone through emotionally through that, when that happens, you would be like, well, that's just a cheap stunt.
Yeah.
Like it would be as a cheap thing. Like, oh, okay, well, we need him alive for this sequel, so there you go, right? It wouldn't have worked at all. And so by having this other structure makes the rest of the movie fuller.
Yeah, I think that that's very true. I think that we get a fuller sense of the story, and especially those moments as we do come to learn the truth as to what happened going on between Jacob and his dad and Dom and all of that. Like when that story is revealed, I'm like, oh, okay, wow, that's actually kind of interesting. And then we have that turn. And actually, I totally bought the turn when Otto was the really rich guy whose dad rules a country or whatever, a dictator. And he's the one who is, kind of ends up, as you said, teaming with Cypher, and actually is double crossing Jacob and sends his bodyguard guy up onto the top of the truck to take out Jacob. And the moment when Dom sees what's happening and that his brother is thrown off the car, and he like swerves his car so his brother has a place to land. And I kept saying to myself, a car is probably not much better to land on than the road. I mean, sure, a little bit, but geez, it still is a hard thing to be landing on. I kept laughing at that because they keep doing that in the film over and over, which
and over again.
I know.
Yeah.
Here, Letty, land on the car, not the dirt below you. It's like, I think the dirt would have been softer, Dom.
No, that was one of the first things that talked about post of the movie was like, yeah. So in that sequence, when Letty's on the dirt bike and she's then shot in the air and falling, so she's traveling at, you got to think 20, 30 miles an hour. Dom's in a drift, right? But he's going at least because they've been doing 80 to avoid landmines. So you got to figure, even in a drift, he's doing 40 or 50 miles an hour. So she's traveling 20 miles an hour one way, and she's going to hit a car that's going 40 miles an hour the opposite direction and not crush every bone in her body. Of course, that's what's going to happen, right? So no, it is.
It's the nonsense of the world. You just go along with it because it makes sense.
Go with it.
But I liked that moment when he saves his brother, and then all of a sudden it's like, and then Mia kind of comes to the rescue, and she makes sure he's okay. And I was like, I liked this. And in a franchise that's all about family, you have at this moment, yes, Jacob is their enemy, but he's their brother. And all of a sudden you have this brother and sister working to save their other brother who's just been double crossed. And the way that shifted, I actually bought that, and that really worked for me. I liked that.
No, I agree. I agree that I agree it was well done. And I think that because we got the backstory and the flashbacks, we were ready for that change.
Well, let's talk through some of the action, because there's a lot of action set pieces.
There sure is.
Yeah. So, well, first off, I don't know if it counts as one, but we have that first car race. I don't know if it's really an action sequence, but certainly it ends in a big explosion. So I was like, it's car racing. I guess it kind of
this
fits.
Car racing. The car got some air. That probably happened. But that to me was more just setting up. To me, the first real big action piece was in the jungle.
The jungles of Montequito, totally made up Central American place.
Yes, when apparently an entire army is guarding a plane.
Right.
So they had an insane amount of the army that goes through. So that sequence was, I think that sequence was very well done. It was, honestly for me, it was one of the only sequence in it where parts of it where I had time to think. Right. And I had time to think only because of weird things. Like, for example, I ride motorcycles and I love riding motorcycles. So when Letty's taking off doing all the stuff in a motorcycle, the fact that she doesn't have anything over her eyes, I'm going, she couldn't see a thing. Right. Because all the air that's going into her eyes, she wouldn't be able to see a thing going that fast on a motorcycle. Right. And then beyond that, the second thing, which I paused for a second, which was the number of people in this army that just kept coming at him, made me think, like, what? I didn't understand the scale of this, right? Because it seemed like the plane crashed in like a place that had been taken over by separatists, and then they went in and didn't want to get the.
And it looked like it crashed on some ruins, because we have some like ancient, I don't know. Again, it's a made up part of Central America, but let's just say Mayan ruins, right? It's just something like that. It's those ancient ruins that we have here in the jungle. That is where nobody's plane crashed, and they have to retrieve this thing. So yeah, it's. A lot of people. There was a lot. And so other than that, I was fine with it. There was too many of them. I was laughing a lot through this sequence because it reminded me of Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull, because there are so many vehicles driving around in the jungle. And I'm like, I've seen this in other movies, and I know for a fact that jungles aren't as paved, and I know it's not paved, but as ready for a road, as driving as all of these jungles seem to be. And again, you have to go along with it in the world, in the context that we have here. It's obviously designed for some vehicles because somebody went through and put landmines everywhere to keep vehicles out. It was a very strange setup, but I actually really enjoyed the sequence. We've got first the kind of the shootout at the plane wreck where the military first shows up. And then we see that Jacob is actually watching them. And as they're racing away and then through this minefield, all of a sudden Jacob shows up because he's trying to get this mysterious half sphere that they pulled from the wreckage. And then they're trying to get to this bridge because the bridge conveniently is at the border from one country to another. And that way they're safe from having to deal with this military anymore. And at that point, that's, again, you get into kind of the nonsense of the franchise, which I actually really love. All the stuff, as silly as it is, of them making it over that bridge, which makes no sense to me, but hey, it was fun. And then you have Jacob, who steals the piece, and he drives off of the edge of this cliff
with the airplane catching him.
And then the airplane comes up and catches him.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That was actually pretty cool. That was pretty cool.
That was awesome. Yeah. That was cool. It was amazing. I find that I rate these stunts on how much I laugh with them, because the more I laugh with them, to me, it's almost like an involuntary reaction of how much I enjoyed them, right? Because I'm like, okay, well, this is crazy, and I'm just going with it, right? The bridge sequences, actually, I will stop for a minute and say one of the things I did like about this sequence is it gave Roman kind of his little hero moment, right? Where he actually fought. Because usually Roman is just the cannon fodder of, like, he's the butt of jokes. He says some really funny, stupid line, and they make fun of him, and then he kind of bumbles along with the rest of them. Whereas in this one, he had it where he was surrounded by a bunch of guys, and he actually, shot them all and everything like that. And he got, helped fought people with the truck. And then he had the whole thing where he comes out of the truck gets caught in the ravine, and he pops out the front window and then actually survives the truck landing. just in front of him is
Right.
what we're going to assume happened.
Yeah, right.
So, Chuck Lange's from, so he kind of had his little hero moment in that sequence, which he doesn't get, right? And so I did enjoy that aspect of it. And then also both of getting over the bridge, not only one, the idea of, okay, we're just going to do the first one, which is already crazy. We're going to get the car across by just building up enough inertia that we're going to then assume that it's going to stick to the bridge no matter what the angle of the bridge is and get over.
Somehow,
already
right.
crazy. Yes. And then
That's
the other
what
one
NOS
is that,
does for you.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and then not only with that, they do that, which is already crazy. And they say, no, we're going to amp this up. They're now going to have Dom grab it, go across, and the front fork of his car is going to grab one rope, and then they're going to swing along on the outside and everything, and then roll over the car, have the car get to the other edge and roll a bunch of times and then come out scratch free.
Because it was a cable, so it wrapped up the cable in his axle, and apparently the cable
fork axle, yes,
which is strong enough to kind of like hold it as it swung over. Honestly, it was so nonsensical that I'm like, you know what, it's kind of fun.
It's totally fun because you're right there with them, and the actors are doing their little grit face because you can tell they're like, we don't know if we're going to make it, and it's so nonsensical that you're like, are they going to make it? And so it was just, it was great. The car rolls over a bunch of times, and then they kind of almost pop out, brush off the shoulders, like, okay, let's not do that again, right? So yeah, I thought that sequence was great.
Next up, and this is a very, very minor one, but Dom hops in the car with Helen Mirren, who has just stolen a necklace. He's here to try finding some information about the person, about his brother and where he can find him, which happens to be this rich person, Otto. And so he hops in the car with her and she drives him to the house. Of course, in context of the scene, she's just stolen a necklace and cops are chasing her. So we have a chase through the streets of London.
And she stole the car.
And it was a really fantastic sports car that she's also stolen.
Yes, she stole the car too.
Yeah. What did you think of that one?
Okay, so I thought having Helen Mirren in the movie is just awesome because she's Helen Mirren and Helen Mirren is awesome. But I did think the Cockney accent took a bit for me to get used to. I briefly remember them doing that having her do a Cockney accent in the last one, and so instead of having her regular, her normal voice, which is more of a posh British accent, doing that is a bit odd, but. Okay, so I had two thoughts of that one, and this is the thought. One, the scene itself is like, okay, whatever. It's kind of cool that they let Helen Mirren, drive the car, and then she's doing the same as everybody else. That's great. That's okay. But the other part of it was I started realizing that really that scene just provided service of the plot, right? It was just to say, okay, we have Dom in England. We know he needs to get a hold of someone, and then we need to get him to Otto and his brother, right? How can we do that, right? So there's so many different ways. You can have like them to sit down, have 2 or 3 conversations. They put together different pieces, and then Dom eventually ends up there, right? And to me, which in retrospect, when I thought about it a second time, and I thought about it after the movie, I was like, oh, well, that was a really slick way to say, hey, let's just shortcut all those conversations. You're going to have some conversation partway through, a little bit of exposition while she's driving a fast car, evading cops, and then he ends up where you want him to end up, right? And I thought, hey, that was a way that gets you through parts of movies that are sometimes boring, is that stepwise process that you have, like, all I know is the city and I got to get the actual location. And by doing it this way, I really found that I thought that was a really smart way to do it.
It was fun. I enjoyed it. And it allowed for another fun chase scene, right? I will also say, as a part of this whole sequence here, after he's had his chat with Jacob, we have this moment where Otto called Interpol to arrest Dom. And as it's revealed, once he's in the Interpol vehicle, it's actually Cardi B.
A whole stunt casting.
Yeah, right. A whole team of, I don't know. I just thought that was an interesting set. Is that a potential setup for more stuff in the franchise, right? Because there's some obviously backstory going on between her and Dom, as it sounds. So I thought that was kind of an interesting little moment that we had there.
Yeah, I would think it would be something like a set piece that they could try to work something out if it wasn't Cardi B as the main character, right? You could have Cardi B in it, but you would need someone else to be the main person that's driving all that. Maybe you do that in another movie, but yeah, you could do that where you could just you're going to do like a Charlie's Angels type thing where, they're going to have a whole bunch of, or a large girl team that does, heists or protects people or whatever. You could do something like that. But I don't know. I looked at it as stunt casting. There was a couple, 2 or 3 other, there's other places I saw stunt casting. Yeah.
more than anything, I think it reminded me of Hobbs and Shaw, which seemed like we're going to really start playing with the stunt casting in this franchise because people love it and people want to be in this franchise, and we're just going to find ways to pop them in when we can. Like when Kevin Hart shows up in Hobbs and Shaw, I'm like, oh, that's a weird small part for him to be. He was the air marshal on the plane, and just a very small bit, which I'm like, okay, well, it was fun. Is he going to be back? I don't know. Maybe it's just stunt casting, and here's another example of that. So who knows? Or maybe they'll both be an F10. Just don't know where they're going to go.
maybe they'll bring the team back
franchise.
to pull Dom out of something else. But I looked at it as stunt casting. There was one other stunt casting that I did notice it's much lesser known, right? Because I actually had to explain to my son who it was, but they had for those that like the stunt casting they had was that there's a sequence in the end when they're in the truck and they throw, they get in the truck and they there's a fight scene with a larger black guy and they throw a bomb on his chest.
Oh, yeah.
And she's like, and he's like, oh, you'll kill us all. And he says it in French.
Yeah, French.
You'll kill us all. And they kick him out and it's a parachute. He is the current UFC heavyweight champion.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So that was there was the other part. I was like, what, that was like, cause I was telling my son, I was like, that's Francis Ngannou. And he's like, who? And I was like, all right, let me explain to you who he is. But anyway.
So next up, this is the moment when Jacob is tracked down where the other half of this sphere is, this Ares weapon, and it's in Edinburgh, and so inside like a church, inside a vault, which was very strange, but that's how it works. And so now we have the team kind of all converging here in Edinburgh to stop him, and of course there is a truck on the street that is full of electromagnets that are disrupting cell phones and everything else that's happening here. And meanwhile, Otto's out in a car, and he's going to be the pickup point person for Jacob, who's stealing this piece. And then he's on the rooftops with zip lines that he's attaching, going from building to building. So, what'd you think of this sequence?
Overall, the sequence I thought was decent. Wasn't of the sequences, it wasn't my favorite one. It worked. The end of it was great. Right. Not jumping to the end, that was great. There was a lot of comedic happenstance that occurred in that, right? Where Roman and Tech are in the back of a truck that they then find the back of this truck, and then they get the guys, and the guys are coming, the guys bring them in. It's 4-on-2. They're going to kill them. And then, Ramsey just so happens that when she's following him, then sees this open yellow truck there that she gets in that she can't drive. And it just happens to be the same truck. And so then they kind of have the comedic fight scene in the back of the truck, right? Which, I mean, it worked. It worked. It was fine. It was serviceable for what it was doing. Of the action sequences, to me, it wasn't my favorite until the end when she turns on the electromagnetic and it pulls that car through the store. Right. I really enjoyed that. And also I liked what I looked about the practical effects of how they did that, where, they obviously weren't using a real magnet, but they actually had a real car and had it, on the side and pulled it through the store. And I thought that section of it, to me, made all the rest of it worth it.
Well, and let's also not forget, we have a whole part where Dom is in his car. He gets a souped up car from, and I loved seeing, Lucas Black back in the franchise, along with several of the other Tokyo Drift guys, right? It's Lucas Black, Bow Wow, and Jason Tobin are all back in this film, which was kind of cool to see. And they have the whole rocket car thing, but they're the ones who provide him conveniently with his car that he needs to be driving around. And he's the one who spots his brother on the zip lines. And so meanwhile, while we have the whole story with the electromagnets, he's now chasing his brother, and then he stops. He runs up onto a building, onto the rooftop, tackles his brother through a window. They have a whole fight kind of going on inside I don't know, it looked like an office complex. And then his brother jumps out, and now they're fighting on tops of buses and vehicles. And as Jacob's trying to get to Otto, and they're trying to stop him.
Honestly, that to me also was significant, mostly just because it was like, well, both Dom and Jacob bleed in that sequence, right? When they fight each other hand to hand, they both bleed. Where outside of that, they usually stay without scratches. But yeah, to me, like I said, I was fine with it to move the story along. It got it where they then caught Jacob. It had the nice effect of the car at the end. But to me, that was on the list of all the action sequences. To me, it was okay. I was, I was like, we've had some crazy. This one's okay. Let's get back to the crazy.
See, this was my favorite action sequence. I had so much fun with this, and it's because of the electromagnets. Now, don't get me wrong. The armored truck chase also with the electromagnets, like everything where they're using these. And I'm just like, is this how electromagnets work? I'm not sure. Because on one moment, all they're doing is disrupting cell phone signals and satellite signals. And then later it's like super magnets that, repel and attract. And I thought I loved how they were using the concept of it and using them to draw things to the car or repel them away to stop things and to make things happen. And so I had a lot of fun with this whole sequence, and I don't know, everything in it really worked well for me. I had so much fun. They clearly were having fun also with the whole sequence. And I loved the bit with Dom and his brother. And I thought it was really funny when they crashed through the window, because I almost felt like it was from the perspective of the people who were working. All of a sudden it's like, you're working, and all of a sudden two guys burst through your window, and you're how many floors up? And then you have this whole fight through the building. And I don't know, that whole thing just made me laugh. And yeah, absolutely ending with a fantastic moment when they pull, with the electromagnets, they pull Jacob's vehicle that he's now stolen into their car. And that's how they finally capture him. I had a blast. I loved everything in it.
The car at the beginning for that one, and you can let me know if I'm remembering this differently, the car at the end was the first time the magnet really affected something outside of the truck. Like the one where they were moving the cars around was when they split it all out and put it in a bunch of cars, and they had those little dials. And that's when they were using it to drag all the debris and then push and pull the trucks together and all that stuff, right?
They were using it a little bit for some of that stuff. It was more but it was more like, that's where we were starting to see what it could do. Like it would drive by and it would yank phones out of people's hand. Cause there were shots where you had just a bunch of phones and things stuck to the side, like, seats and things like that. And
and then wasn't dropped it down.
Yeah. They just kind of kept escalating it until the end. And this is the thing. It's like, why all of a sudden at the end, like now every single car it passes, it's totally like yanking so it gets to a point where it's absurd, but I went along with it. I had a great time with the electromagnets.
Good.
Yeah. All right. So the next one, we have the attack on the safe house. This is after they've caught Jacob. Otto is now teamed up with Cypher and sends in the team to go extract Jacob and then basically kill everybody. This is where he wants to, Otto is like, I'm Han Solo, like that whole thing where he's like, Star Wars reference. I was like, I loved the end of that conversation, right? You're Yoda, you're a puppet.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. No, the ending was great. The rest of it was like, you were kind of wondering where you were going. And then at the end, it's like, oh, okay, that works. Right. Yeah, that sequence, to me, it was really more just the continuing establishment of Dom as this superhero best fighter in the world, right? Where he's going to sacrifice himself because they're in that sequence, they're caught for a bit, and then, all the principal characters leave. And then a distraction occurs, and then they're able to run away. And then they're running away and they're trying to escape. And then they get to a point where they could logically just close and shut this door behind them that the bad guys probably couldn't get through easily and keep running and escape. But Dom decides, nope, I'm going to stay here and fight. You got to figure 45 of the best guys, right? There, because there's supposed to be 50. And by then they've probably killed about 5 or 6. So about 45 of these guys. I'm going to fight them so you guys can escape, right? And that just doesn't, and then he does. And, he takes out about a dozen of them, and then gets through, and then, does the Samson move where he takes the chains and pulls it down so everybody then falls down and crashes down in the water. And then and then Letty swims down and saves him and brings him out.
Right. Letty, who never actually fled. She didn't do exactly the whole reason he was sacrificing himself. She did not flee. Exactly. I'm like, well, I know. And it was a whole thing.
Well, I actually I like that. I think that, cause when he wakes him up, she's like, without you, none of this is worth anything. Right?
Yeah, no.
So she's never going to allow him to sacrifice himself for her because she's like, well, if you're not here, then what do I care? Right. Sure. So then I appreciate that. And also the other parts of this, which we kind of skipped over some of these sequences, I think, where this movie does a good job of giving the female action characters more agency, right? Where they are, in fights with, a lot of times with men, but they're in fights and able to hold their own. They don't have to be saved by someone like at the end, like where they were kind of just keeping a guy at bay and then they are saved at the end. It's like, no, they actually then finish and win the fights and everything on their own. And so I think that it was that piece of it was part of trying to establish that Letty is not his girlfriend or his wife. I think they're married at this point. So they got married in the last one. So it was just his wife that he needs to protect, but she is his equal partner, and that if they are taking risks of any kind, they are going to take these risks together.
Well, and to that end, I skipped over it, but I shouldn't have. We do have the fight in Elle's apartment when Letty and Mia are trying to track down what's going on. This mystery in Tokyo. What is this strange key? It turns out to be Elle, the daughter of the scientists who put it together. And of course, that's where we learn that Han is alive. But yeah, we have a fight sequence in Elle's apartment, which also I think it's fun. I don't think it did a whole lot new, but it still was a fun sequence seeing these three women taking down all these people.
Yeah. And to me, that was more the new, right? Because they've done in the past few movies, they've done they've done for these Fast Furious movies. They've done with women in fight sequences, right? But it really wasn't until the last one, F8, where they finally had a woman fighting, like Letty fighting a man. Right. Usually the women are fighting women. Like they had Gina Carano in it, and then they have, Ronda Rousey in them. And, they have that. And there's really strong, powerful women that are fighting, but they're always just women fighting women. Right. And so, but this is the first time where they were like, hey, we're in a situation here where we are going to fight a bunch of guys, and they still just, hold their own in their own manner. And they don't have to be saved by someone else coming in later on. Right. Where the only time even Han comes on is when the guys are running out to escape, and then he shoots a bunch of them, right?
They're in the street at that point,
Then he has the blue light reveal of himself, right? Which is, which is, I think was intended to be cooler than it came off, but it worked. I was fine. I mean, everybody knew it was Han, so I wasn't really, surprised by that part of it. Yeah. But so to me, that was more the newness of trying to go a little bit further into making the female characters truly equal to the male characters in every way in these franchises.
Well, okay, so then let's now shift to our big final one. We have the big armored truck chase in Tbilisi, and also paired we have Roman and Tej going up into space in the rocket car that Lucas Black and his team had put together as they're trying to kind of destroy this satellite that is, or disrupt the signal from this satellite is technically what they're trying to do. All right. And then this is where we learn that Cypher is out there and she's flying around in this ship and all that sort of stuff. So there's a lot going on in this particular sequence.
This was one of my favorite sequences in the movie, and here is why. Because this, as I've been saying repeatedly like a broken record, I'm in it for the crazy, and this was crazy, right? When they launch Roman and Tech off the back of a big airplane in a car with a rocket ship tied to the top of it into space, right? So there's a movie where they have now done this, where they launched two men into space in a car, and at the same time, when they're the other scene they're interjecting it with, the two men in space in the car is not the craziest thing going on right now. Right. And that to me was like, that to me was amazing. That part of it was, once they got into space, it became like, oh, they're just kind of hanging out in space. Okay. Right. And then the sequencing going on with the cars, with the electromagnetics, the pulling and pushing the cars away from, Dom doing with his own car, the dragging debris behind them to then, distract the other cars that are chasing them, bringing down telephone wires, all the different things they're doing with that chase
flipping
sequence, right?
The armored truck.
Flipping,
from its nose.
I hadn't gotten there.
Oh, okay.
Right. Using, yeah. I was saying I hadn't gotten there yet. But you're absolutely right. Coming together, flipping them, and the whole like Letty can't get to him, but then that's also what the turn. So you have the sequence you brought up earlier where Dom throws the car underneath Jacob to save him, and then Mia pulls him up in the truck, which was great. And then he then gets in another car and he comes around and he can now join together with Dom to flip the truck over, which. Flipping the truck over, Dom then, Jacob loses his car, Dom catches him, then I don't remember how, but Dom comes behind it once he gets beside him, jumps into the truck, right? Because how did he end up in the truck?
They hop onto its underbelly. The whole idea was to attack it from the underside. They blow a hole into it and drop into it to start getting the pieces.
Right, but I know I'm jumping to the scene here because they flip it over.
Yep.
And then that part was great, but then they end up, okay, no, that's a different sequence. Sorry. Because they flip it over and then but Dom ends up in the truck, doesn't he? And he ends up in it.
Right, because they blow a hole into it because they have to get into it to steal the Ares and to stop the computer. So they all hop into the truck.
They hop into it.
They're all trying to get out, but Dom, but because it's like, it's starting to go down a hill or something. Yeah. And, but Dom, because all of a sudden that's when Cypher shows up in the jet and starts attacking them. So he has to get back in and he's trying to flip it back over and that whole thing.
Right.
So yeah.
Exactly. And then has it rolled down the sequence when it flips over and rolls down the hill and almost goes off the cliff, but he gets in behind the wheel and shifts it into gear, slams on the accelerator, goes and catches it and keeps going. I mean, the whole sequence was, I mean, visually it was definitely, there's always amping up what the danger and challenge was. It's so fantastic. And I mean that in the true definition of the word of where this is a fantasy, right? You have to really, you're suspending disbelief, right? But it's just so well executed and so well done and so much fun to watch and enjoy that it is great. And I was so impressed with how that interchange sequence overshadowed, we got two guys in space in a car. Right. And still I'm thinking about what's going on the ground.
My wife and I were talking about this afterward. We're like, wait a minute. That car wasn't space ready. I mean, and those suits, they're wearing scuba suits. Like, none of this makes any sense at all.
Well, yeah. Did you get to me, the best part, the craziest part of the scene was, did you get when they're like, okay, we're going to ram into the satellite to destroy it, right?
Yeah, right?
And then it's like, okay, we need to make it go. He pushes on the accelerator.
I know.
Of the car, like they're just driving a car. Yeah. So that means that, like, when they're with the propulsion, he's doing it with the steering wheel. It's amazing. Yeah. It's so
silly.
Like, okay. Yeah. And they just so happen. And that was my whole thing with, like, how they going to get them back in? Well, they just so happen to come across the space station.
Right.
Space
well, it's
station.
like gravity. It's like all of the things up there happen to be floating really close together.
So
they were
exactly. Yeah.
They just had to get to the space
happened
station.
to be like, oh, there's the space station. All right, let's go.
So silly.
Yeah.
Just
so
silly.
It was.
But it's fun. And that's where I think the film, this whole franchise it's kind of forgettable and it all kind of blends together in my head. But it's a lot of fun. And that's why I think that it succeeds, because you do have some of these things and some of the chases are better than others. But everything with the electromagnets, I thought was really fun. And it's, it did play to that joke of the invincibility, which is, I think that works in context of this idea of these people just doing ridiculous things and surviving. I think that they're clearly having fun with it. And obviously the thing that I think draws me to the franchise is these people clearly love working together. They have created this family bond. I mean, really, it is family, right? It's that sense of, the people that you build your own family, and they've built it. And like, you get to the last scene here of the film where you have all of them sitting at a table, like 10 people around, or this, I don't know how many people, but a bunch of people sitting around a giant table. Brian pulls up in the car. Of course, we don't see him, but just like the car pulls up, it's him. And it ends. I'm like, you know what? It succeeds in kind of giving me the feels for kind of the positive vibes that they keep running with the franchise here. So
I really like that ending. And I liked it on multiple fronts. One, I think that the choice of doing the brother allowed them to bring Mia back, because they had to try to figure out, how do we get Mia to come back and not have Brian here? This way works, with Jacob the brother, with the brother story plot. And then at the end to say, hey, there is a missing chair here. And then to have him come up and everything. And it's like, you get the feeling that, which is part of the emotional part that I get out of that was the actor, given that the actor is actually dead, right? You felt that at that point, when they said there's a missing chair here, they're not talking about the character anymore.
No,
right? They're really talking about that that the actor should be here.
Paul Walker.
Right?
It's really for Paul Walker.
Should be here. Yeah. Right. Yeah, that's who should be in this seat, right? And so, and then they have him come up and drive up. That keeps the, it allows you to keep the image alive of, in this universe, he didn't die, he's still alive. But, everybody knows the truth of that. And I think but that to me was a great way to end the movie there.
Yeah.
To, give a nod to their really, and I agree with you, it is like a family. Give a nod to your brother that you've lost.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So it ends on a positive high note, and now we're looking forward to the 10th one. So awesome.
I absolutely am. And I also wanted to echo and say a second as well. I think that these movies are exactly what you're saying. They are forgettable. They run together. They are just, the stories aren't these things of where you're going to become introspective about your place in the world and what you've decided to do with your life choices. But to me, the greatness of these movies is, I think movies serve many different purposes. And one of those is, hey, I'm going to take 2.5 hours and I'm going to leave the real world and I'm going to escape and have fun with these characters and people that are in front of me, right? And these Fast and Furious, especially since Fast and Furious, but from Fast 5 on, definitely. These movies deliver that. They say, hey, we're going to give you 2.5 hours of pure entertainment where you don't have to think about anything in the real world or anything else like that. We're just going to give you a time to escape and have fun. And to me, that is what these movies really deliver.
And they do. They definitely do. And I always keep thinking that 5 and 6 are my favorites, but I think 7 actually might be my favorite now that I think about it.
7, the Deckard Shaw one, the one where Deckard Shaw's the main bad guy.
Yeah, and
Jason Statham. Yeah,
I think a lot of that though is because the way that the film closes with Paul Walker and that whole thing, like that was really emotional, and I felt that they really nailed how they ended up having to deal with that ending. Like that was very touching. So I just love that they bring it all together like that. So it's a fun franchise. So all right, so well let's rate this film. So on Letterboxd, out of 5 stars, where would you land with this? And would you give it the Letterboxd heart?
Oh, I went in with the Letterboxd heart.
I figured. So that's an easy question.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I went in with that. For me, none of these movies are perfect, but they are all really good to what I would consider great. And Fast 5 for me has always been the gold standard for this. And this movie, I think, is at the same level. And so I rate these movies based on what they provide and what they give me. And I would recommend them to anyone who wants to have an entertaining time in theater. So for me, it's 4.5 stars with a like of the heart. I absolutely loved this movie, and I do think that it was one of those ones where I will have to watch it a couple more times and then Fast 5 to figure out which one of the two that I like better.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
This movie was amazing.
Worked well for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
For me,
hit me where I live.
Yeah. Right. For me,
Yeah.
I land on 3 stars, 3 stars with a heart. I think that it's a lot of fun, like a lot of these other films. I don't think it quite won me over as much as Fast 5, 6, or 7 did, but I think it's on par with a lot of them. I mean, it's a very fun film. It's very easy to watch. I don't love it, but it certainly is something that I would have no problem returning to. So, so that's where I land with this one.
Yeah. So awesome. Yeah, that's fair. But I plan to watch it. I'll probably see it in theaters a couple more times at least because my youngest son didn't get to go with us when we saw it. So I was like, well, I'll just go with you later. So,
there you go.
So,
well, I'll tell you, my kids
it's
both
great.
after we finished it were like, they want to now watch the whole franchise. So I have a feeling that, before the summer's over, we will be probably doing a Fast and Furious kind of family movie night type of thing where we go through the whole thing and they get to experience all of it. So
was this the first one that they'd seen?
Yes.
Wow. So then
jumping in on
do you they're jumping in at the end, which is great, but I guess I'd be curious too what you decide to do with that. Do you start with 1 or do you start with 4? Right, because the first 3 are such different movies from this.
Yeah, but I'd still start with 1.
So
and
one,
technically, like now, they've relabeled. Well, I don't know if they've labeled it as such, but the 3rd film, Tokyo Drift, they actually now say it's the 6th film. So it actually, I don't know. I guess you would watch 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 3, 7, 8, 9. I guess. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah. From a movie watching experience, though, I wouldn't do that. So
I may. I'm curious.
Yeah. I'd be curious what the reaction is with that then, because if I saw 4, 5, and 6, and then 3,
It's a very weird
like,
shift, right?
It'd be a weird shift, right? Because then all of a sudden, like, okay, well, when Han shows up in the middle of 3, you have all this knowledge of him, and then you'd have no knowledge or caring about any of these other characters.
Well,
right?
I think so much of it is just them saying chronologically, this is where it actually takes place.
Yes, exactly.
So,
exactly.
But, so who knows?
Awesome. Well, enjoy the marathon. We did that. Oh goodness, our family did it when the Fast 8 came out, but we just jumped to 3 and then went from there. Cause the my kids at the time, nobody wants to watch 2. Right. Too Fast, Too Furious is just,
well, that's where you meet Roman.
Nobody wants to see that. Right? So
you mean Roman and Ted in that one. So
the first one they weren't as interested in. I couldn't get them into it at the time, so we just started at 3 and then went from there. But it was doing a Fast Furious marathon is a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fun franchise to do that with. It's just it's goofy, silly fun. So awesome. Well, thanks for joining me, Ocean. I appreciate you hopping on to chat with me about this movie. And hopefully the two of us will be back to talk about the 10th and maybe 11th, whenever that one rolls around.
10th and 11th. Yes. Yeah. I look forward to talking to you about both of those.
It is going to be
fun.
And
about the outcome of this marathon.
Yeah, right. I'll have to let you know. I'll talk about it over in our online community over in Discord when we do. If you are interested in joining our online community with fellow movie lovers, you can learn more at thenextreel.com/Discord. And if you're interested in supporting us to help keep the lights on and get some great benefits while you're at it, you can head to thenextreel.com/membership. Thanks to all of you out there who are members already and who have been supporting us. We really appreciate it. We have been cranking a lot of member bonus episodes out. Our June one was actually Quiet Place Part 2, and actually we will be back. This is the end of the season. We're actually taking the month of July off. It'll be our hiatus, but we will be back in July to talk about Black Widow. So, and of course, the Next Reel has a bunch of member bonus episodes as well. And keep in mind, if your Next Reel feed is too full, each of the shows now have their own respective podcast feeds. So you can subscribe to just the ones you're interested in. And while you do that, also, if you could, hop into your podcatcher, Apple Podcasts, whatever it may be, and if you can leave a star rating or review for that particular new feed, that would be great, just to kind of get those back into the rotation on their platforms. All right, everybody, thank you so much. We appreciate it, and that's it for today. Meeting adjourned.
You don't know everything about me. I've lived a lot of lives. Before I was an Avenger. Before I got this family. I made mistakes choosing between what the world wants you to be and who you are. Go back to where it all started.
Where did you think I was all this time?
We have unfinished business.
My girls are the toughest girls in the world.
I'm sorry. We had our orders and we played our roles.
It wasn't real.
It was real to me. To me, you were everything.
Bring her home.
Put your seatbelts on. She's such a mom.
One thing's for sure. I'm I'm done running from my past.